Let me just tell you, this is why I love crochet. 4 rows of this knitting is equal to 1 row of this crocheting. So this shawl will take me 4 times as long to make as this one did. So that's a huge difference when you think about it. And welcome to Mandobug Crafts, episode 111. What's up, everybody? My name's Amanda, but you may know me on the internet as Mandobug, and this is my crafty podcast where I hopefully inspire you on your making journey as I share mine. In this episode, I have some knitting and crocheting to share. As always, I'll have links down below to skip along to the different sections that you may or may not be interested in. So, starting out with something I've learned. This last 2 weeks since I've recorded, because wow, I've been recording regularly every 2 weeks now. I've found a system that works for me, so that's great. Yay for consistency. So in the last 2 weeks since I've last recorded, I have had a major swatch fest. I only swatched for 5 days straight. It was meant to be just a weekend of swatching, but it turned into 5 days worth as I worked my way through coming up with some design ideas to submit to a magazine call. So in the process, I discovered slip stitch ribbing for crochet. So I know how to knit, but I've never officially released a knitting pattern. I feel more comfortable with crochet. That's what I've done since I was 9, and I started modifying patterns really early as well, so I've always kind of felt comfortable modifying and designing in crochet. So most of the time I'm talking about crochet design, but sometimes things trickle over. In this case, this is very specific to crochet design. Slip stitch ribbing is a way to actually get stretchy fabric with crochet. I know definitely on previous episodes of this podcast bashed crochet ribbing because many styles of crochet ribbing are not actually stretchy, whereas with knitting, the whole reason you do a rib is to keep your fabric from rolling. So if you knit in stockinette, if you put ribbing along it, it will keep the edges from curling, but then also it gives you this stretch factor, which is great for the bottoms of sweaters, the brims of hats, the cuffs around your sleeves. That's what ribbing is for. And when ribbing first started kind of coming out into the crochet scene, it wasn't for the purpose of actually being stretchy, it was for the purpose of imitating a knit look, and that really frustrated me, especially with the front and back post stitch rib look. That is just extra bulky and I feel like unnecessary, and I don't like the way that it looks. But slip stitch ribbing, you guys, I have been missing out. I allowed my bias of hating crochet ribbing to keep me from finding this gem. So people who learned to crochet recently or are following more modern crochet patterns probably already know about this and have been doing this for a while, but I've been out of the loop. So basically what you do is you loosely chain and then do rows of slip stitching, and the key, and this is through the back loop, and the key is knowing where to put your hook, because it is not intuitive when you're first starting. I had a hard time with it. I had a hard time keeping my chains loose, and I had a hard time figuring out where to put my hook. But once you master the technique, and I will link to the video below that I followed to learn how to do this, you get a stretchy piece of fabric, which is ideal again for brims, or in this case I was swatching for the neck of a top-down sweater. So you can see here, I'll take my shawl off, we'll talk about the shawl later, but you can see that I still get a nice crew neck fit that fits over my head, and I didn't know that was possible. So slip stitch crochet ribbing for the win, you guys. I need to stop being so biased in my ways. I feel like I'm an open-minded person, but I guess this one slipped right past me. So yeah, I learned how to do slip stitch ribbing, which is great. Hopefully this sweater design gets picked up, and even if it doesn't, like I said, I'm probably going to release these designs independently after the waiting period is over. So and this is not the color that I sent my submission in. I wanted to share my swatches so bad. so bad. But I only shared the swatches that had nothing to do with my designs, that were purely for measurement purposes only. I shared them in my Instagram stories as I went through. So if you ever want to see more behind the scenes, I like to upload a lot of my day-to-day stuff that's crafty related to my Instagram stories, which now cross-post to Facebook stories too. So if you follow my Mandobug Facebook page, you'll see them there as well. There's another thing that I learned too that I wanted to share. So this sweater design that I submitted was a circular yoke sweater, and I used the Vogue Knitting Ultimate Vogue Knitting book to do the math for how to size and shape and grade the circular yoke pattern, and my stitch pattern was a multiple of 4. And I had no idea, because I haven't really taken any classes on Excel, that there's actually a function within Excel that will take a number and round it to the nearest multiple. So that blew my mind. If anyone designs sweaters or is interested in learning to design sweaters, there are a couple great resources out there that teach you how to grade a sweater using Excel. And the one in particular that I followed was a knitting design, like design your own knit sweater class on Craftsy. I'll see if I can't go back and find the name of it, because Craftsy's kind of gone through several transitions of ownership. But yeah, it was, the teacher has a pretty heavy accent, but the information is there, so it was easy to understand, and I used that information to make Excel work for me, so I'm not doing the math. I plug in the gauge, I plug in, you know, the math that's necessary for a circular yoke sweater, and then I plug in the sizes that I want and make minor adjustments from there. And that rounding to the nearest multiple of 4 thing was huge in helping me make sure that I was increasing at a rate that would work within the stitch pattern. So yes, round function for the win. I knew there was rounding, like to the nearest whole number, which I've used whenever you're using like a stitch gauge that's not whole numbers. When you do your math, you end up with not whole numbers, and you can't have like a half a stitch in a row, you know. So I've used that, but the multiple, round to the nearest multiple, was new to me, so that was pretty cool. Moving on to finished objects. I finished the dog fur hat. It is done. I panicked because I thought that I didn't make it long enough after I started decreases, and with certain types of yarn that have a halo like this one does, they're hard to rip back, and so I panicked that it wasn't going to fit, but I tried it on, and here we go. I slightly felted the hat again after it was done when I blocked it to help try to minimize the shedding as well, the best that I could. But here it is, and it fits, and yeah. So I hope that she loves it. Because of the nature of the yarn, the ribbing isn't super tight around the brim, but it is tight enough to catch. So it's not pulling in, but it's not falling off or moving around. So I think it ended up perfect. It is a little tall for my head, which is fine. I don't mind the look of it, and I think it will fit the recipient just fine. And if you haven't seen previous episodes, this hat is the Quick Ombre Hat pattern, which is a free pattern on Ravelry that I follow. And I used hand spun that is 50% wool and 50% dog fur. So yeah, I still have to spin. I have to blend the rest of this order's bats and knit a matching scarf, which I think I'm going to contact her and find out what she wants once I send her this hat, because I feel like the scarf would look better in the lighter yarn than the darker yarn, because majority of the hair that I have is this gray white color, and I don't think it blended well with the black merino. I think it looks better with the gray, so I'll see which color scarf she wants. I'm just going to do a plain handful of stitches, garter stitch knit scarf. Yeah, moving on to... Oh, I'm looking at my show notes and I wrote them down wrong. Way to go, me. My other finished object is the 2 Ways to Crochet It Right shawl. I finished it! So I was right. The original had 2 of this stripe and a picot border, and I did not have enough yarn to do that with a small amount of padding yarn left over. So instead I just left the one open work row, and then I did 2 rows of plain double crochet and then a half double crochet border. I opted not for the picot this time just because I like the way the clean edge looked in these colorways. So this yarn is Schmutzerella Yarns, and it's 2 different bases. The brown is a sparkle base, and I don't know if I can get it to pick up on the camera. It can be hard sometimes, but it's called Spectacular, the base is, and the colorway is Turn This Stupid Fat Rat Yellow. And it's fingering weight, and the other yarn is fingering weight as well. It's her Dude base, which is a merino nylon blend. And it's in the Freelance Bio Exorcist colorway, which was a Beetlejuice inspired colorway that was for a movie nightclub, which I believe is exclusive. I don't know how long she holds them exclusively. I don't know if it's forever or a year, but her movie nightclub yarns are exclusive. Oh yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned the brown is Harry Potter inspired. So I really love the way that these 2 yarns played together. I love the subtle greens in the white color, and I'm really excited to get this pattern out and released. I'm actually going to go take photos of it later today while I go for a walk in the park with David and Annie. So yes, I'm loving this. I crocheted it using a 3.5mm crochet hook, and I feel like it's a pretty decent size. I've mentioned before the fun thing about this pattern, and the reason why it's called 2 ways to crochet it right, is it's 2 different ways to make a right triangle. So this is a very deep triangle shawl because it is a right triangle, a true right triangle, which means there's not as much wrapping power around the neck, but that's fine. There's enough, and you can just tuck it under if you like to wear your shawls this way, and it wears deep. But it is also nice if you like to wear your shawls in the traditional way, because the deep V of that triangle covers a majority of your back. So, well, depending on how tall you are, actually, it may not cover as much of your back. I'm 5'2", I'm short. It goes all the way down to my hips. But, yeah. So 2 skeins of fingering weight will get you this fun shawl. After photography, I'm sending this off to my tech editor, and it will be ready for testing in approximately a week. So if you're interested in testing, I'll put my testing call out on Instagram, and we'll go from there. I have been enjoying hosting my corner to corner linen cowl test on Instagram, so I think I'm going to continue doing it that way. That test went better for me than the Ravelry one. So yeah, side note, I'm gonna put this back on because I'm loving it and I'm loving wearing it. So that takes us to works in progress, so I might as well continue talking about the corner to corner linen cowl. I cast on, or hooked on, another one, chained on. There's not as many catchy terms for starting a crochet project. I really like just saying cast on. It just doesn't make sense for crochet. So, hold on. This bag, I've got all my bags in my Eat Sleep Knit bag. I believe it's this bag, at least. Let's find out. Yes. And this bag, I don't know if I've shared this one off before. It's another Fates thread bag. It's a Tim Burton fun themed bag. Beetlejuice, Corpse Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas, Alice in Wonderland. I think those are all of the movies that are on here. But I love it so much. I love that Fates Thread does such, what's the word? You know, when you're really into a topic, fandom. She does such fandom-inspired prints that I'm able to literally have all of my projects in a Nightmare Before Christmas bag. I have to share. Except for this one's not. This one's not Fates Thread. This one is Banna and Bean, I believe. There's no tag on it, but I'm pretty sure I remember getting this at Vogue Knitting. I think her tag's on the inside. Let me just make sure before I share false information. Yes, Banna and Bean. Okay. Side note, back to the crochet, the corner to corner linen cowl. So, this is why testing patterns is, like, it's never the wrong thing to do. Ever. It's never wrong. technically my pattern was sound with one mistake that me and my tech editor both missed, which was a turn at the beginning foundation before you start row 1. But other than that, there were no technical errors in the pattern. But what came out in testing is more like preferences for reading and clarity. And also I had a tester use handspun, and I encouraged people to use different weights and things like handspun because I put notes in the pattern for making adjustments. I want this to be a pattern that you can use over and over again with different weight yarns with minimal effort. So what happened was she had, like, I want to say 300, no, maybe it was 350 yards. The pattern calls for 150 yards of worsted weight. She had 350 yards of I believe it was like a sport to DK weight range handspun. See, that's the thing with handspun. It's not always the same range throughout. So that's why a pattern like this works well, and that's what keeps me wanting to design patterns like this, because I love using handspun, and some patterns are just a little more difficult to use handspun in if your spinning is less consistent. I'm all about the side rants today, oh my gosh. Okay, she used her handspun. She wanted to use as much of it as possible. So I had notes on how to adjust the beginning section and weigh your piece so that you have enough for the end section. But what I had not thought of is making sure you have enough yarn for the middle to be able to actually close the cowl. So she made her piece super wide, trying to use up as much of her handspun as possible, finished the piece, and didn't run out at the end, so those notes worked, but it wasn't long enough. I think she said she could barely button it rectangle style, but she wanted to do bandana style, and it wasn't long enough. So she had to rip out, and she ended up having to make it 3 times, and I felt horrible because I feel like, as the pattern writer, that's my fault that information wasn't in there. So I've got an idea based on the ratio of my original sample, how tall it is to how wide it is, how much weight of yarn you should need for the middle section, and I'm testing that theory out with this bulky weight yarn to be as far off from the original as possible. So this yarn is super fun, by the way. Look at this. My kids dyed this yarn. It's the best thing ever. They dyed it 2 years ago, and it's been sitting in stash because I don't generally work with bulky yarn, and I didn't know what to do with it. But if you guys haven't seen this before, this is Kinky Yarn. So Kinky Yarn is an exclusive yarn to Maker's Mercantile, and it comes in these pre-knitted tubes, and you unravel it as you work with it, which is why it's named Kinky Yarn, because as you may already know, once you've knit a piece and it's stayed knit for a while, it gets kinky over time as it absorbs that energy, I guess is the best way I can describe it. So it's a long tube of 200 grams bulky weight, single ply. It comes undyed. So it was at least 2 years, maybe 3 years ago on Easter, we used our leftover Easter egg dye to dye this kinky yarn together, and it was so much fun. I'll see if I can't go back and find that video and share it with you guys.
And no, I got some in my hand.
That's okay, we can wash your hands.
Me do this green one.
Okay.
And one more. And then one.
Yeah, so I've decided to use this yarn. So it does add a little bit of a texture, and I'm curious to see if this disappears in blocking, because sometimes that will happen. I know that I've frogged, ripped out sweaters and then washed them in hank form, and the kinks go away. But if you knit with kinky yarn, I don't know if how well the kinks go away with blocking. So I'm curious to see, especially because this is crochet too, which is a more rigid structure. So I have started, I've weighed the whole thing, and I'm testing my ratio concept. I checked with some friends and they said the math is sound. I just want to make sure for myself. And also, it's a chance to use up this really special yarn, and how cool is the way that it's kind of striping. That's my favorite thing about working with yarn that's been dyed on a blank like this, because I've worked from knitted sock blanks, and depending on the way you dye it, you can get these cool almost striping effects. The one thing that I'm not super fond of is it's really hard to penetrate this bulky weight. It's knit so tightly that even soaking and massaging the yarn, it's difficult to get the color all the way through the tube. And even if you successfully get it all the way through the tube, it's hard to get it, you know, in the center of those tightly knit stitches. There's just more resistance to the yarn that I'm used to. I don't remember the details of if I pre-soaked this long enough, or maybe we could have used more dye. There's a lot of reasons why yarn or dye won't soak into a yarn fully, but yeah, it's a little unfortunate it's not a more saturated color because I am not a pastel person, but it's special and I do like the way that it's working up, and I think especially because of these like golden, almost orange moments in the yarn, I might be able to get away with some awesome matching buttons this color, and then it will be more my style. So yeah, I've been working on that, and so far so good. I think it's gonna work out. I think I have to reweigh this, but I'm about to do my final decreases to square off the rectangle, and it looks like it will be the same tightness as my original cowl buttoned. Yeah, I think it's gonna work, which is awesome because then that means this pattern can basically be worked in any weight. All you have to do is change your hook size to match your yarn and then weigh your project, and you'll know right away if you're gonna get a width you want, because you'll know like, okay, this is how much I've used. I need X amount of times that amount to complete the cowl, to make it ensure that it's long enough. And if you don't have it, you don't have it, and you can pick a different yarn or get more yarn. So that's really exciting to be able to offer such a versatile pattern that most of my testers have said in their feedback, like, this is a great pattern. Like, once you get a hold of what you're doing, especially if you have a yarn like the tester who was using handspun, it's very potato chippy, and you just want to keep going and watch the colors transition. It breaks up pooling and heavily variegated yarns. One of my testers used complete scraps, just random bulky weight scraps, and her cowl turned out awesome too. I'll have to put like a parade of tester photos, because I got permission from all of them to share their photos. So yeah, I think the bulky weight scrap one turned out gorgeous. And yeah, so the feedback was basically, this pattern's really fun, really easy to repeat once you understand what you're doing, and it's a great gift pattern as well, and it only uses one hank generally. When you go up to the bulkier weights, you need more. This is 200 grams. So because I think I'll have to check this concept too, but I think it comes down to yardage. You need 150 yards. Maybe that's not right. I'll have to double check. Yes, so that's my corner to corner linen cowl. So the testing for that ends on February 1st. So I'm going to be releasing that pattern on February 2nd. And I've decided for the initial release of the pattern, I'm going to put it up free for 48 hours. Now, I have my patterns on Ravelry and Etsy, but because Etsy has fees associated with listings and sales, I'm not going to put it up for free on Etsy. What I'll do instead is I'll put it up free on my website for 48 hours. So I will link to that below. I'll also share it on Instagram and Facebook when I release the pattern. That way you can get the pattern for free outside of Ravelry. For those of you who don't want to use Ravelry, it will still be available for free to you. Once the 48 hours is up, it'll be a $5 pattern, and if for whatever reason you wanted to get the pattern for free and you missed the 2 days of freeness, what I will do is I'll offer a permanent 50% off code on Ravelry and Etsy for the pattern if you use the code MBC111, which is Mandobug Crafts, this episode 111. So those are my plans for the cowl. I hope you guys are interested. Definitely snag it while it's free. It is a good gift crochet pattern. Did I call it a gift knit earlier? I've been doing so much knitting these past couple of years that sometimes that just slips right out of my mouth. It is a crochet project, and it is, I would call it an advanced beginner pattern, and that's what my testers are saying as well, only because of the direction of your crocheting. So yes, and one tester said because the way I wrote the pattern too. I put my repeats in brackets, which is not traditional for crochet. They use the asterisks, but I like the brackets. It's a personal preference as a pattern writer. So anyways, what else do I got to, so I got another work in progress to share with you. I'm getting warm in this, so I'm going to take it off. It's doing its job, right? My other work in progress has to do with my Swatch Fest. Oh, I actually have 2 more works in progress. Did I? Yeah. Like, did I even start works in progress? Yeah, that was my only one. I just had so much to say about it that I forgot where I was. I'm drinking leftover coffee. Leftover in the sense that as I drink it down, I keep refilling it with hot water so that I can minimize my caffeine intake while I'm still breastfeeding, because that's important, not to go crazy on the caffeine. So my very watered down coffee, but it's still good. My other works in progress. This one came from Swatch Fest. So this was me testing out a shawl shape for a design that I wanted to submit to the magazine. Well, I did. I ended up submitting 3 designs, a shawl, a sweater, and a poncho. So we'll see if any of them get picked up. If not, you guys will see them probably released before they'd be released in the magazine, because the call that I submitted to are for magazines coming out this fall and winter. That's the kind of lead time that they are running on. So anyways, this was just a swatch that I started to test the shape, and it took me about 4 times to get it right. And this is going to be a crescent shaped shawl, and basically what I wanted to do was chain the width of your shoulders and break it up to put the increases on your neck and the edges, so that the beginning of the crescent shaped shawl is the whole width of your shoulders, and you're getting these increases around your neck and you're getting these increases out, because I find that I like my shawls wide enough to wrap, and sometimes if you start massive increases like that, what ends up happening instead is you run out of yarn, and I wanted my shawl shallower than wider. So the best way to do that is to start with a wider chain. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows, and look how wide it is already because of where I started. And actually, I might not have cast the full width of my, oh, I did. No, yeah, this is my cast on right here, finger to finger. So I ended up having to rip it out a couple times because I wasn't getting the shape that I wanted, and it turned out that what I really needed to do was increase aggressively every other row, or more aggressively every other row. So that's worked out perfectly to get me the shape that I want. And so this shawl is using this McLana Bobble. I got it from Maker's Mercantile, I think like a year ago. It's 200 grams of fingering weight, and it's 4 strands that, let's see if I can share with you. Can you see that this is 4 strands just like laying next to each other? They're not even plied. The individual strands are each a 2-ply, but then they are not, again, plied together. They're just laying there together. And what is cool about this is each strand changes colors at a different moment that are going to give you a nice, fun gradient ombre effect. I always forget the correct terms. I think it's ombre when it's color to color, where gradients within a range of color. But it's 50% acrylic, 50% wool, so you still get that drape. Bomb wool. I don't know if that means superwash wool or not. I'll have to look that up because this is a German yarn. The ball band is in German. Yeah. But yeah, so I've been crocheting with this. I started from the inside, which I'm going to regret later, I know. But I wanted the bright color to be at the top and the black to be around the border. I kind of hemmed and hawed back and forth what I wanted to do. Ultimately, the reason why I chose to do the bright color first is so that it was easier to see my increases as I was deciding on the shaping for this shawl. That's literally what it came down to. Sometimes with black yarn, it's hard to read your stitches. So I'm starting with this magenta color, and this is going to be a new design. I haven't even fully fleshed it out. I have this shape that I want, and I know that I want to put like a lace detail at the last maybe 10 to 12 rows of the shawl. So for now I'm just crocheting double crochets in this shape. If you don't know already, double crochet is my favorite crochet stitch. It is my go-to, and I try to do it as often as I can when I can. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. A new design that came from Swatch Fest. I have no business swatching a new design when I have so many others that I want to work on, but it just kind of happened. I swatched it, I loved it, and I didn't want to rip it out, so it's just kind of on the back burner. And since it is such a mindless project, because there's only increases in 4 spots and you can actually see them, I'll write the pattern so that you have markers there, but I just see them as I work with them out of experience. It's super simple. So I'm crocheting that using a 3.5 millimeter hook. It's the same hook that I used on the 2 Ways to Crochet It Right shawl. I like that size with fingering weight, like a 3.5 millimeter or a 4.0. That's for me is the sweet spot. Okay, I do have another work in progress that I cast on, and no, I didn't give David's hat any love in the last 2 weeks. Where did I put that bag? Oh, I cast on the knit version of my 2 Ways to Crochet It Right shawl. I mentioned that in the previous episode, that I realized I can also knit this design, which isn't always possible, of a crossover between crochet and knit, but for this one it is. And so I started the knit version of 2 Ways to Crochet It Right. So this is 2 Ways to Knit It Right. And let me just tell you, this is why I love crochet. 4 rows of this knitting is equal to 1 row of this crocheting. So this shawl will take me 4 times as long to make as this one did. So that's a huge difference when you think about it. But it's knit, it's lighter, it's drapier, it's sure to use less yarn. I probably won't make it bigger, but don't hold me to it. So the other thing is it's harder for me to tell which is the right side of my work by just looking at it. So I've got my 0 progress keeper on the front of my work there, and I made sure to write the pattern so that the edge is nice and easy to pick up when it comes time to change directions and pick up your stitches. So this is also a fun, mindless project. I'm loving designing these just mindless yet interesting and unique patterns that it has been a joy to make in addition to design. So, oh, let me tell you about the yarn. Oh, and I'm using a 3.75 millimeter needle, so almost the same size as the crochet hook, just a little bit bigger. It's a US 5. And here is the yummy yarn. This yarn is so gorgeous. I love it so much. So I picked this up at a trunk show roughly a year ago. This is Teal Torch Knits. Let me grab the ball bands. Teal Torch Knits, and she's got some shine on these bad boys. The speckled colorway is a Sunday Kind of Love, and the darker colorway is Sinking Into My Soul. Let's see if I can balance the yarn. And they're both on her TTK sock, Teal Torch Knit sock, 75/25 superwash merino wool and nylon. 463 yards in these cakes, quite a bit. So I'm gonna have leftovers, especially because my hanks from 2 Ways to Crochet It Right, one of them was only 400 yards. I think it was 400 yards. It may have been a little more than that. So these already have more than the originals, and they both weighed way more than 100 grams, like 108 and 109. So I will have some fun leftovers, which I think I might come out with a scrappy, fingering weight scrappy design. I had an idea for one that's also kind of like a mindless potato chippy design. So the problem is, you guys, I have too many ideas. So I legitimately wrote them all down and then ordered them in the order that I am most excited to work on them, and rewrote the list in that order, and I'm planning it out that way, schedule-wise. So I have scheduled designs out a year from now, which is crazy to think about. I have no business coming up with more ideas, but I'm not gonna stop myself, because basically the way that works is you just reorganize your list and reprioritize your list, and your least favorite designs go to the bottom, and there's a good chance that your least favorite would be people's least favorite too. So yeah, I've been working on this, and I love the way that it's working up. I think it's so cool. Pink is not my color. I don't like pink at all, but somehow this pink made it in, and it's appropriate. It's appropriate for me. It's my kind of pink. So, yes, that was my final work in progress. So moving on to Let's Chat. The only real piece of interest outside of knitting and crochet this week is that my son Jack turned 5. And so I can't believe how quickly the kids are growing. It blows my mind. He was at his dad's on his birthday, so I gave him a call, and then when he came home Sunday night, I had the house decorated in Spider-Man Avengers theme, and we decorated his cake together. He wanted a Bindi in the Ink Machine cake, which is an indie game and it's not even new. It's an old indie game. It's difficult to get that kind of stuff. So what I did instead is I printed out images of the characters. I printed out copies, and then we glued them together over toothpicks, and I let him place them in the cake, and we had a plain white cake, and then we tried to make black frosting for the ink and put it all over the cake, except I didn't have black food coloring, so what we ended up doing instead was trying to mix all of the colors, which just made this gross pastel green color. And then David finally figured out, like, oh, well, we could just add the cocoa powder that we have. So we ended up with kind of a dark brown by adding massive amounts of cocoa powder to the frosting. And I just put the frosting in tubes for the kids and let them go crazy, because if you don't know anything about the game, it's rated T for teen, but I play it with the kids. We had conversations about, like, are you scared? How are you feeling? And they love it. So I'm like, what the heck, why not? It's a horror game, cartoon styled horror game. So far, we haven't played through the whole game, but the monsters are made of ink, and there is violence, but it's not as realistic. They know that it's fake. I guess that's just a judgment call on me as a parent. I'm okay with it. So, yeah, that is what he wanted. But yeah, so he had a good birthday, and that's basically the only thing worth sharing outside of the knitting. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will catch you next time. Happy crafting! Bye!